A factory worker lies on a mortgage application, he's arrested a waitress, omits a debt, she's denied a loan. A single mom overstates her income, she loses her home and gets audited, but when New York's top law enforcer does it, she gets silence. Letitia James didn't get caught shoplifting, she got caught lying to banks, to regulators, and to the very public. She once wagged her finger at this isn't a rumor, it's printed, signed, and certified, a packet marked confidential mortgage discrepancy. L. James landed on the desk of Congressman Byron Donalds just as the Capitol lights began to dim inside the folder. Was no smoking gun, there were three. First, an email in Letitia's own voice, stating in black and white, "I do not intend to occupy the Virginia property." Second, a power of attorney filed shortly after swearing under penalty of law that she would occupy that same property. And third, perhaps the quietest scandal of them all, a mortgage document filed in New York nearly 2 decades ago listing a 5-unit building as a 4-unit property. That one change, seemingly small, meant the difference between market rates and preferential treatment, between standard insurance and sweetheart discounts, between honesty and fraud. Byron Donalds didn't raise his voice, he didn't need to. He read the documents once, then again. His legal aide watched silently as the congressman turned each page with a steadiness that was more dangerous than anger. Then, breaking the silence, Donald simply said, "Get everyone in here now." It was 7:46 p.m. when the door closed behind them. 2 advisors, 1 counsel, and his chief of staff. The group crowded around the documents. One advisor muttered, "That email and the POA alone. This isn't sloppy, it's contradictory, intentional." Another added, "This is textbook occupancy fraud, falsified disclosures, and misrepresented property classification. If she were a private citizen, she'd be cuffed." Donald stayed quiet. He opened the folder again and pointed to a handwritten note tucked in the back, written in thick red ink, "Recommended for civil plus criminal review immediate." No signature, no explanation, just a direction and a warning. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes locked on the name on the folder. L. James, the same Letitia James who once declared that Donald Trump deserved to be financially dismantled because, as she put it, "No one is above the law." He recalled that speech. Everyone in the room had. It was replayed on every major network. The words were hers, delivered with relish, conviction, and political theater. "When ordinary Americans lie to a bank, she'd said they go to jail." Donald spoke barely above a whisper. "Let's see if she meant it." He reached for his pen and began reviewing a draft summons, prepared in advance by a staffer who had clearly anticipated his reaction. "Send this to the Oversight Committee," he ordered. "We're not making noise, we're demanding answers." And with that, a line was drawn. Letitia James wasn't going to face a headline, she was going to face Congress under oath, on camera, and under fire. Some people, when faced with mounting evidence and public scrutiny, reflect. Letitia James, by contrast, assembled a war room. It was 8:03 a.m. in Manhattan, and the queen of selective justice had just been told she was going to face Congress, not a think tank, not MSNBC, Congress with subpoenas, cameras, and worst of all, questions she couldn't script inside her office. The curtains hadn't even been drawn before the spin cycle kicked in. Legal counsel, press strategists, political operatives, each walked in with the same mission: explain how the woman who once swore no one is above the law had simply misunderstood her own. "Let's be clear," one aide said, waving a highlighted print out of the documents. "There's no intent here. Maybe a misfiling, maybe a clerical mistake, certainly not fraud." Letitia nodded slowly, the same way a fox might blink when asked if it intended to be in the henhouse. Then came the line, inevitable, scripted, and painfully hollow. "This is just another political stunt from the MAGA crowd. They're desperate, of course. When in doubt, blame the hat. Never mind that the stunt involved documents she signed, dates she confirmed, and declarations she delivered under penalty of perjury. When all else fails, declare victimhood and shout witch hunt." It worked for cable news panels, why not try it on federal oversight? By mid-morning, calls were going out fast. Democratic allies, those not already retreating to safer distances, began pressing the DOJ to step in and review the legality of the summons. The unspoken translation: make it go away quietly, preferably. Meanwhile, inboxes at friendly networks filled with helpful guidance. Letitia James targeted in partisan smear campaign graphics were cued. Talking heads briefed lower thirds, ready to read. Trump allies escalate attacks on New York AG, but even the best PR team can't unring a bell once it's been rung by oversight authority. By Lunchtime, the Department of Justice issued its official statement, "We will not intervene in congressional proceedings. This is a matter for the legislature." Translation: "You're on your own." That's when it hit her as CNN flashed its red banner, Letitia James to testify before Congress in 5 days. The room went silent. There were no more talking points, no more emails, just one woman staring at a calendar that suddenly seemed a lot louder than the excuses surrounding her. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. Everyone in the room knew what came next, and 5 days was never going to be enough to rewrite 20 years. 5 days later, Washington didn't look forgiving. It looked ready. The hearing room inside the Capitol wasn't flashy, no dramatic music, no swooping cameras, just solid walnut paneling, cold fluorescent lights, and the unmistakable weight of consequence. When the doors opened, no one cheered. They leaned in because for once, someone from the elite class, the self-appointed guardian of justice, wasn't at the podium. She was in the witness seat. Letitia James entered without a word. Her expression was as practiced as any prosecutor's, chin up, eyes forward, shoulders square, but the walk was slower than usual, controlled, almost rehearsed. She didn't look like someone ready to deliver a verdict. She looked like someone about to receive one. At the front of the room sat Congressman Jim Jordan, chairing the session, known more for volume than subtlety. Today he was all restraint, no grandstanding, no smirks, just one simple statement, delivered like a gavel tap. "This hearing will be conducted with fairness and order. Everyone is accountable. No exceptions." The room didn't applaud it. Processed. Then the mic shifted to Congressman Byron Donalds, seated just a few chairs down. He didn't waste a second. No introductions, no posturing, just a remote click, and the screens behind him came alive. A video began to play. Letitia James, just a few months earlier, standing in front of a bank of microphones, declaring, "Financial fraud isn't harmless. There are victims. There must be consequences. No one is above the law." Silence followed, not awkward, reverent, as if the room knew what came next would stain more than reputations. Donalds turned again, this time to a still image on the screen, an internal email bearing James's name, timestamped and direct. "I will not occupy the Virginia residence." Then click N. Official power of attorney signed and notarized. Days later, I let James affirm that I will occupy the Virginia residence as my primary dwelling. 2 statements, one person, opposite truths. Donalds didn't lecture. He didn't even raise his voice. He simply looked at her, not with contempt, but with clinical clarity. "We're not here to invent anything," he said. "We're here to echo your own words back to you. That's all." Letitia didn't respond, not with defiance, not with apology, just the quiet tightening of her jaw, a move too subtle for cameras, but loud enough for the people who knew her style. It wasn't the fall that stung. It was the fact that she once built her brand on the very platform now collapsing beneath her, and for the first time the room wasn't watching a prosecutor, it was watching a case. There's a moment in every courtroom, or in this case, a congressional chamber, when the accused decides whether to retreat or retaliate. Letitia James chose the latter. With the screen still glowing behind her and the eyes of the nation fixed on her face, she leaned into the microphone, calm, calculated, the voice of someone who'd weathered headlines and outlasted reporters, and with a tone devoid of doubt she said, "I did not commit fraud. I did not personally benefit from any loan connected to these documents." There it was, the official denial, no hesitation, no room for nuance, a statement as absolute as it was familiar, the same kind she once demanded from others. But Congressman Byron Donalds wasn't built for theater. He wasn't playing offense, he was laying a record, and so without changing his expression he reached for the next document. A projector blinked, a quote appeared, "I will not occupy the Virginia property." Letitia James' internal email archived. He gave the room a beat to read it for themselves, no narration needed. Then came the next slide, a power of attorney signed. Days later, the same property, now with a sworn declaration to reside there as primary dwelling. "This was your decision," Donald said, eyes steady. "No staff, no clerical assistant, just you twice." Letitia didn't blink, but her jaw moved just slightly, as if recalibrating the next angle. "The context of those documents," she replied, "has been stripped. This is not the full picture. These snippets have been selectively framed." Selective framing, Donalds repeated, nodding slowly. "Let's test that." And with that, he moved to the third exhibit, one no one in the room had expected so soon, a mortgage disclosure from a separate loan application years earlier. Under the section labeled marital status, James had listed her father as her spouse. No one laughed, not yet, but a few staffers stiffened. One aide scribbled something onto a yellow legal pad and underlined it twice. Letitia didn't speak. She turned for the first time to her attorney, an unspoken request for help that came too late to disguise. Donalds didn't capitalize on it. He didn't deliver a monologue or look to the cameras. He simply tapped his index finger on the stack of documents in front of him, then said, 3 entries. 3 contradictions, but 1 name, 1 signature. Silence returned, not heavy or theatrical, but analytical, like the kind that fills a courtroom after a prosecutor rests and the jurors are still processing the weight of what wasn't denied. The Democrats seated along the far row began to murmur quietly. One leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. Another bit his pen. Letitia adjusted the microphone, but said nothing. Her composure remained intact, but it had lost its sheen. Not broken, just less certain. And across from her, Byron. Donalds closed the folder in front of him, the soft clack of paper hitting leather louder than anything that had been said. He didn't smile, he didn't gloat, he just gave a small nod and spoke without emphasis. We'll continue after the recess. But everyone in the room knew what he really meant was, we've only just begun. There's a point in every unraveling scandal when the accused begins to run out of stories and starts borrowing everyone else's. After the recess, Letitia James returned to her seat, looking less like a prosecutor and more like a weathered campaign ad. Familiar, polished, but increasingly hard to believe the folder had been closed. But the damage that stayed open. Byron Donalds resumed with the kind of restraint that only made things worse. Do you deny signing these documents? Letitia gave a diplomatic shrug, the kind perfected by public officials fluent in plausible deniability. I'm not denying I signed them. I simply don't recall making those statements. Yes, the gold standard of political defense, total memory loss paired with total innocence. It's always fascinating how elected officials can recall fundraising numbers from 6 months ago to the dollar, but ask them about a notarized document bearing their name and suddenly they've got amnesia that would make a defense attorney blush. Donalds didn't blink. He clicked the remote on screen, a slide showing the financial impact of one of James' oldest tricks, a 5-unit building listed as 4 not once, not temporarily 4 years according to our estimate. He said this misstatement, if we call it that, may have saved you north of $300,000 in interest, insurance, and regulatory exemptions. Letitia adjusted her mic, then delivered what can only be described as bureaucratic poetry. Zoning conditions fluctuate. Classification data can vary depending on jurisdictional updates. I wasn't directly involved in determining those. Raised a request for adjournment. We'd like to pause briefly, he said, to verify the completeness of the materials presented. It was a beautiful attempt, legal ease, for we're getting torched. Can we regroup? But Chairman Jim Jordan didn't bite. He simply glanced down, then said dryly, there's no disruption, we'll proceed. The room did not erupt, but it rippled. Quiet camera shutters, some whispered curses, and a few reporters tapping frantic notes. CNN panned in on Letitia's face just as she reached for a glass of water she hadn't touched all morning, and as the temperature rose, not in the thermostat, but in the optics, Byron Donalds gave a slight nod toward the side door. In stepped a man in a blue-gray suit, holding no notes, no binder, just a memory. Donalds didn't need to introduce him. The public already knew the name, but for those still catching up, the voice that followed would make one thing abundantly clear. Letitia James wasn't just facing her paperwork anymore. She was about to face the man who knew exactly where every one of those papers came from. He didn't walk in like a crusader, he walked in like an accountant, because that's exactly what he was. But the moment Sammy Anter stepped to the witness table, the air changed, not louder, not tenser, just sharper. Like everyone in the room suddenly remembered why this hearing wasn't theater, it was forensic. No notes, no theatrics, no need to grandstand. Anter leaned toward the mic and spoke like a man who knew exactly how deep the numbers went and how shallow the excuses had become. My name is Sam Anter. I submitted the documents under review, and I stand by every page. That was it. No frills, no disclaimers, just ownership. He didn't waste time. He began dissecting the evidence with the precision of someone who's seen fraud not on paper, but in practice. First, we have the email. It states clearly that Ms. James did not intend to reside in the Virginia property. Then we have a signed power of attorney affirming the opposite, used specifically for mortgage qualification. No one interrupted, not even the ones who usually did. Next, a property in New York declared as a 4-unit dwelling when public records and insurance data confirm it has 5 over a span of more than 20 years. This Misrepresentation likely provided long-term financial advantages. He clicked the remote, a slide appeared on the monitors. It wasn't flashy, no bold red text, no courtroom drama, just a breakdown of interest rates, property classifications, insurance differentials, and duration. At the bottom, estimated benefit $1.73 million. Anter didn't look up. He didn't need to. This isn't clerical error, it's patterned behavior, strategically positioned, repeated, beneficial. He paused only once, then added, I've investigated fraud for most of my professional life. This isn't a typo, it's a template. You could almost hear the pin drop cliché, but even clichés felt loud now. Letitia James, who just hours ago delivered rebuttals with steel in her voice, now stared at the table, not blinking, not writing, just still. And then Anter delivered the line that should have echoed off the ceiling. When regular Americans lie to a bank, they get prosecuted. That's what Miss James said on camera. I believe she meant it. No one said a word, even the cameras, still rolling, seemed to zoom in slower. Byron Donalds looked at Anter, gave a slight nod, not for drama, but for clarity. You've made your case probably clearer than anyone else today. On the far bench, a Democratic aide leaned toward his colleague and whispered what half the room was already thinking: we can't stop this guy, not with talking points. No one disagreed, because for once the numbers had spoken, and the math didn't care who used to hold the microphone. The hearing had ended for the morning, but outside the trial was just getting started. Within hours, America's airwaves were on fire. Screens that once ran Letitia James' triumphant speech against Trump now displayed something else, a double-screen montage. On the left, her voice thundering about justice; on the right, Anter's deadpan breakdown of a $1.70 million benefit. She allegedly forgot to mention the caption, same law, different standard. Cable anchors leaned in with the glee of kids unwrapping late Christmas. Independent platforms didn't hold back either. One channel dubbed it fraud in high heels and looped it with all the subtlety of a hammer. Hashtags followed like clockwork. Letitia James scandal, double standard, justice. By noon, both were trending in Washington. By 2, they were trending in Idaho, and for once the usual defenders on the left went quiet. The New York Times ran a placeholder piece with no headline. Update: MSNBC shifted to a panel on student loans. Even James' usual allies in state politics gave a masterclass in collective silence, each one pretending their phones had mysteriously lost signal. But the internet had not. Clips of Anter's calm voice citing precise financial advantages over 2 decades went viral faster than any campaign ad she'd ever produced. His quote, "This isn't a typo, it's a template," was now printed on t-shirts sold by online stores that hadn't mentioned politics since the Mueller report. Meanwhile, Letitia James exited the hearing room flanked by aides. Ignoring a barrage of reporters, cameras caught her brushing past microphones with the precision of someone trained in legal deflection, but even her signature cold stare couldn't disguise what followed. One sharp-eyed photographer captured the moment. She glanced at her phone, a single message, one line. No one knew what it said, but her face answered for her, drained, colorless, with the kind of stillness that doesn't come from calm but from calculation. Inside, Democratic leadership panic had upgraded to paralysis. A private caucus convened within the hour, the mood not defensive, not even angry, just lost. No plan survived the witness table, and now no one wanted their name attached to what might become a crater. By evening, one Democratic senator quietly withdrew public support for James' re-election campaign. No press release, just an updated website and a cancelled fundraiser. Outside the Capitol, Byron Donalds was approached by 3 reporters. He stopped, adjusted his jacket, and said only this: "We didn't have to convince the public. She did the talking for us." Then he turned and walked away, leaving a dozen unanswered questions behind him, and more importantly, a nation that had just watched the hammer swing upward but not yet fall. By the next morning, the chaos wasn't just in the media, it was inside the Capitol walls. Letitia James had survived a brutal hearing, a viral storm, and a witness who disassembled her narrative one spreadsheet at a time. But what came next wasn't from outside, it came from within. The notice landed on the committee's desk before noon, unsolicited, unprompted. A former legal aide to Letitia James, who served in her office back in 2017, had requested to testify publicly. No anonymity, no redactions. By 2 p.m. the oversight committee had reviewed the submission. The witness, a man in his early 30s, clean-cut, stiff posture, hands folded like he wasn't sure whether he was about to testify or apologize, took the seat with the weight of someone who'd spent 6 years regretting what he didn't say. His First sentence hit harder than any accusation from across the aisle. I was instructed to alter internal documentation in order to meet residency qualifications for a mortgage application tied to Miss James. You could feel the silence shift from quiet to hostile. Then came the exhibit, a printed draft email dated September of 2017. Subject line: PA package edits text. We need this to meet occupancy requirements. Fix accordingly. Signed with the initials of a senior staffer still employed under James. The Democrats froze. The Republicans, they pounced one after another. GOP members lined up like they'd just been handed a golden ticket. The term pattern of deception was thrown around so often it could have been a campaign slogan. Letitia's legal team passed notes faster than they could read them. Her PR advisor stood outside the chamber, phone in one hand, aspirin in the other, and inside things got worse. The Democratic caucus, already fraying under the media backlash, began to show visible cracks. Two junior members reportedly argued in a hallway about how long we're going to keep covering this mess. One even stormed off, swearing under his breath as he disappeared behind the cloakroom doors. Desperate James' team floated a request to pause the session. Jim Jordan, ever the minimalist, gave it all of 4 seconds. Denied. We're continuing. That was the moment one of James' top strategists pulled her aside during a procedural break and said calmly but firmly, "You need to consider stepping down, at least temporarily. You're not winning the hearing anymore, you're losing the country." Letitia didn't flinch. "If I fold, they'll say I was guilty. I'm not giving them that headline. I will not be dismantled by political outrage." And just like that, the die was cast as aides scrambled to recalibrate messaging. Byron Donald stood, adjusted his mic, and with that steady calm that had become his trademark throughout the inquiry, announced, "Next witness, please." The room didn't breathe, because what followed wasn't just testimony, it was the sound of the walls closing in. There's a difference between a fall from grace and a slow public disintegration. Letitia James was now experiencing the latter in real time, in high definition, and under oath. The hearing room no longer felt like a forum, it felt like a reckoning. Byron Donalds flipped open the folder one last time. No dramatic flair, no raised voice, just the sound of a man stacking facts against a woman who once thought she owned the definition of accountability. "Let's revisit your own words, Miss James," he said. "You said, and I quote, 'No one is above the law.'" Then came the list, not theoretical, not partisan, just chronological. 1. An email denying intent to occupy the Virginia home. 2. A notarized document swearing the opposite. 3. A 5-unit building recorded as for 2 decades for a mortgage form that claimed your father was your husband. 5. Internal emails urging staff to adjust documents to meet legal thresholds. He paused, not for effect, but to let the math settle. Even a bad headline can't fight arithmetic. These aren't oversights, they're operations. Then, with precise timing, Sam Anter was called back, not for more numbers but for a verdict. "In your expert opinion," Donalds asked, "would these actions constitute grounds for civil penalties?" Anter didn't hesitate. "Absolutely. Each instance carries potential fines of up to $1.1 million. Separately per violation." If you listen closely, you could hear pens stop moving, because even among career politicians, numbers like that make people nervous. Donalds leaned in, not with aggression, but with a clarity that left no room for oxygen. "If you were a regular citizen, you'd already be facing charges. If you were Donald Trump, you'd already be banned from doing business in New York." Letitia didn't rebut, she didn't plead the fifth, she didn't even raise her head. She simply wrote something down in her notebook, slow, quiet, and utterly void of the fire that once lit her crusades. No one asked what she wrote, no one needed to. Even the cameras, which had been chasing her face for days, panned out. There was no need for a close-up anymore. The story had shifted from her words to her silence. Outside, a reporter caught the moment and delivered the line that summed up the day better than any spin room ever could. "She's losing the room," and the audience back inside. Donalds closed the folder and didn't bother looking up. "We don't need to deliver a final statement," he said. "The facts have already spoken louder than any verdict." And as the hearing room settled into an eerie stillness, one thing became painfully clear for a woman who once claimed the law applies to everyone. It had finally circled back, this time with her name on the docket. By the time the sun dipped behind the dome of the Capitol, the room was already fading, the overhead lights dimmed, not by design but by time. A few seats now stood empty. Reporters had packed up their deadlines. Met the cameras once hungry for every twitch and whisper now rested on their tripods like forgotten sentinels. Letitia. James quietly stacked her papers, no sweeping gestures, no final stare into the crowd, just the mechanical folding of a laptop, the click of a pen and a slow zip of a leather binder. No aides rushed to greet her, no microphones followed her to the door, no one called her name. She walked out the same way she'd come in. Alone, but this time the silence didn't feel commanding, it felt final. A few Democratic lawmakers slipped out shortly after, no press briefings, no spin, just quick steps and downcast eyes, the kind of departure reserved for those who know the applause won't be coming. Sam Anter exited next, still composed, still stone-faced. He didn't smile, he didn't wave. The man who'd reshaped the conversation said nothing because at that point there was nothing left to say. Byron Donalds remained seated, the only one still reviewing the folder in front of him. He wasn't flipping pages anymore, just resting his palm on the cover, a thick block of paper stamped in bold red. Type DOJ Civil Criminal Review Priority flagged across the room. Chairman Jim Jordan leaned in, voice low but deliberate. Would you like to offer a closing statement? Congressman Donalds didn't look over. His eyes were fixed on the upper gallery, now half vacant, scattered with intern stragglers and staffers who had stayed not for duty but because they knew history rarely announces itself before it happens. He shook his head. No need, he said. They've heard enough. And with that the hearing closed, not with a bang, not with a cheer, but with a collective understanding that this time the story didn't need narration. The final image, broadcast nationwide, wasn't a confrontation or a confession. It was a folder closed, and at its base one last phrase, barely visible but unmistakable: Federal Accountability Index updated. Some truths don't shout, they just stand documented.